Today I want to share with you 10 essential foods for the traditional foods kitchen. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferments, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, this list of foods is by no means exhaustive. This is just what I consider the essential foods that are especially helpful if you're a beginner and you're starting out on your journey making the transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen. And these are foods that I consider staples that fit under the broad umbrella of what I like to call the Four Corners Pantry. And if you've been with me for a while, you know I use that terminology when I refer to the four areas, more or less, where you keep your food. One is your working pantry, your everyday working pantry, and then your refrigerator, and then your freezer, and then your extended pantry, where you will keep your food storage and your backups for various foods that you use on a regular basis that you may be able to find on sale and whatnot. And the first of these foods is a whole chicken. You can't go wrong in buying a whole chicken when you are making that transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen. And again, if you've been with me for a while, you know I'm not going to preach to you that it has to be organic and pasture raised and all of that. Yes, is that wonderful? Definitely. But if it's not in your grocery budget, buy whatever chicken you can afford, a whole chicken. And the reason that I say this is because I'm a firm believer if you become very fanatic and you spend more money than you have allotted for your grocery budget, that's just going to cause you stress. And stress is one of the worst things for your health. So I would rather you just buy a whole chicken that's in your budget and you cook it up and you serve it with love, and everybody sits down at the dining room or the kitchen table and enjoys it. And that is so much better for your health than worrying about whether the chicken was perfectly raised, and it's a lot better than relying on fast food. So the first thing on your grocery list when you start to make this transition to a traditional foods kitchen should be a whole chicken. And I've got a lot of videos on how to roast a whole chicken, and I'll be sure to put them in the description below. But that is one of the best places where you can get started. And I would say, for me, that's probably the #1 most essential food for the traditional foods kitchen. And one other thing that I want to mention as we're talking about buying a whole chicken, this is a bit of a subcategory, but it is related to the chicken, so I do want to share it here. Be sure, if you can eat them and tolerate them, be sure to add eggs to your grocery list. Eggs are very nutritious. They're easy to prepare. It can be one of those things when you get home from work and you're tired and you don't want to just stop at a fast food restaurant on your way home. If you know you have a dozen eggs and some sourdough or sprouted bread in your refrigerator, you can whip up a quick dinner that's nutritious and that's real food. So when you're picking out that whole chicken, make sure that you also pick a dozen eggs. #2 is actually a little bit of a group, and it's what I call the aromatics. And that's your carrots, your celery, your onions, and your garlic. These are all reasonably priced, and again, buy what you can afford. If you can get organic, great. Locally grown from the farmer's market is great, or whatever you can find at your grocery store, depending on where you live and what's available to you. Just buy what you can afford and what you can find. Fresh, you're never going to go wrong with fresh vegetables, but those four, including the onions and the garlic, along with the celery and the carrots, those four aromatics are going to serve you so well in the kitchen. First of all, they're very nutritious and can be created into side dishes to go along with your roast chicken, but they can also serve to help with increasing the mineral content when you save the carcass from your roast chicken and then go to make bone broth with it. Bone broth is very rich in collagen, well, gelatin actually, which is cooked collagen. And then when you add in some celery, some carrots, some onions, I don't always add garlic, but I do use a lot of garlic in my cooking in general, but not so much with bone broth. But when you add in those aromatics, you increase the nutrients, especially the mineral content of your bone broth. And bone broth can really be the backbone of your traditional foods kitchen. You've got your roast chicken, then you've got your chicken carcass, and then you've got your aromatics that maybe you've cooked and served with your roast chicken, some nice carrots, some celery, some onions. If you want to add garlic, you can do that too, or you can reserve it for other recipes. But that can be a fabulous meal. And then you're left with your carcass and maybe any scrap vegetables that you have left over. The carrot peels, don't throw them out. Put them in your bone broth. Maybe the very bottom of your celery, put it in your bone broth. Your onion skins and any onion scraps you have into your bone broth. And now you've not only had your roast chicken dinner, your aromatic vegetables, which you enjoyed with it, and now you've used a carcass and some vegetable scraps to make a delicious bone broth that you can use to drink. You can use it as a base for soups. You can use it as a base for stews. You can use it in place of water when you're cooking grains, whether it's rice or quinoa or whatever the case may be. And you're constantly working at boosting the nutrition of your overall foods, of your overall meal. So after you put that roast chicken the whole chicken #1 on your grocery list, next put your carrots, your celery, your onions, and your garlic. #3 is milk and yogurt. Now, this is assuming that you tolerate dairy well. And if you do, and you have a source for raw milk, fantastic. But I know so many of you have told me that you can't find raw milk in your area, or it's illegal to buy in your state, or you simply, you're at the beginning of your journey to a traditional foods kitchen and you're a little uncomfortable when people start talking about raw milk. And I understand that completely. I'll share a story with you that when I was first able, this is many years ago, and I was first able to get a source of raw milk here where we live in the Texas Hill Country, and I bought a gallon of it. And, it has like a little bit, because the cream, it's not homogenized, so the cream is on top and the milk is underneath. And sometimes getting jiggled, in the car on the way home, you can get a little bit of butter from the cream forming on the very top. We used to call it the butter plug. So I had to pull out the butter plug, and then I had to give it a good shake. And I wound up over a few days drinking the whole gallon myself before I shared any with my family. My husband's not a fan of it, but with my son. And I figured, well, I survived, I'm alive, it must be good for you. And then my son started drinking it, and he was raised on raw milk. But I know that some of you do feel nervous about it. So what I say is, buy the best milk that you can find. If you can find milk that's not been homogenized, it's been pasteurized but not homogenized, meaning that the cream still sits on top, that's great. And that can be a nice source of dairy that you can make a lot of other things with. If you can only find milk that has been pasteurized and homogenized, fine, so be it. Buy that instead of one that's not been homogenized. If unhomogenized milk isn't available to you, don't worry about it. And if all you can find is ultra pasteurized milk, so be it. Buy ultra pasteurized milk, because the reason I'm telling you to also buy some yogurt, and you just want plain yogurt, doesn't need to be the fancy Greek yogurt, just the most reasonably priced plain yogurt that you can find. And you can take that ultra pasteurized milk, which unfortunately, because of the high temperature at which it's heated, is somewhat devoid of nutrition. You can take your plain yogurt and you can culture that ultra pasteurized milk, which helps put back some of the nutrients that have been destroyed by the ultra-pasteurization. And now you have homemade yogurt, and you don't have to buy that carton of yogurt ever again, because you're going to save some yogurt left over from your homemade batch and just continue to make homemade yogurt using whatever milk you can find. Obviously, the better the milk you can, the better quality of the milk, yes, that's the best. But if all you can find, which many of you have told me, is ultra-pasteurized milk, at least you can inoculate it with the yogurt and make something that's more nutritious for you and your family and friends. So if you tolerate dairy, it's number 3 now. Number 3 on your grocery list should be milk and a small container of plain yogurt. Now, number 4 is all-purpose flour. And this is just, some of you might know as white flour, some of you may know it as plain flour, but number 4 on your list is going to be all-purpose flour. And I know you're saying, Mary, my gosh, white flour, what are you talking about? I want to have a traditional foods kitchen. And don't worry, this is where I say to start. If you have been buying sandwich bread in a plastic bag at the grocery store and you want to start making your own bread, start with just some basic all-purpose plain flour. And once you master making a very simple sandwich bread, which I have a video on that, and I'll be sure again, be sure to open the description under this video. I'll have a lot of videos there that is going to help you with how to make these foods and these meals that I talk about in this 10 essential foods list. But if you just start making homemade bread, that's a huge leap, especially if you're used to running a processed foods kitchen and you're little by little trying to make this transition to a traditional foods kitchen. Just start with some plain all-purpose flour. Now, the good thing about plain all-purpose flour is once you master how to make bread, then you can start to learn how to make a sourdough starter. And you can use your all-purpose flour to make a sourdough starter, and then you can learn how to make sourdough bread. And again, all these videos will be in the description, where I show you how to do all of this in the description under this video. Now, what I want to say is that learning how to make the sourdough starter and the sourdough bread from plain all-purpose flour, that again, all of these foods I'm going to share with you today are available at pretty much every grocery store. So these are not difficult to find. But what's great is, just like you were going to take the yogurt and culture your ultra-pasteurized milk to improve the nutrition, you're going to take your white, plain, all-purpose flour and you're going to turn it into a sourdough starter and then make sourdough bread to improve the nutrition of what would just be plain white bread. So just a plain all-purpose flour is number 4 on your list, on your grocery list. And if you can get organic flour, great, all the better. But I don't want you to stress about this, especially if you're a beginner and you are on your journey making this transition. Just buy what you can find locally, and if you can find organic all-purpose flour is becoming more and more common in grocery stores, so if you can find it, great. Now, over time, you will, as you get used to baking bread and get your sourdough starter going, over time, then you can graduate to incorporating whole grain flours like rye. Rye flour is very easy to get a sourdough starter going, and einkorn and spelt, some of your ancient grains. But I highly recommend just start with all-purpose flour. Build up your confidence with baking bread and getting a sourdough starter going. And then in another video, we'll talk about transitioning up to whole grain flours. Number 5 on your grocery list is going to be oatmeal. Now, I only have one caveat for this one. The only thing I don't want you to buy is instant oatmeal. But the good news is old-fashioned oats are very common in the cereal aisle of pretty much every grocery store. So you can start with your old-fashioned oats, your flaked oats, and those are a great place to start. If you want to push the envelope a little farther, you can buy the steel-cut oats. Often they're sold in like a little metal can. And if you want to go even farther, you can actually buy the whole oat groat. And that would most likely be found if your grocery store has a bulk food section where you scoop things out and put them into bags. But don't feel bad about just starting with your old-fashioned flaked oats. That's a great breakfast. It's easy to make. It's very nutritious. You soak it overnight, and the next morning it's ready in 10 minutes. So that is definitely a wonderful thing as you make the transition, maybe away from the processed food cereals, you know, the extruded, as they're known, cereals, the various flaked cereals that are sold in the box at your grocery store. Transitioning to oatmeal and topping it, you know, with fruit and maybe maple syrup or some honey is a delicious breakfast. And you may be able to more or less sneak it under the radar, especially in the winter, without your family or even yourself or your friends, whomever you're feeding, feeling that they're being deprived of a box cereal that they may be more used to. But just make sure you get those old-fashioned oats or the steel-cut oats, which will take a little longer to cook, but are also relatively easy to find. And if you do decide you want to graduate up to the oat groats, I also have a video on how I like to prepare those to really maximize their flavor. So that's number 5. Oatmeal. It's an easy one. Next on your list, number 6, is nuts and seeds. And again, just buy whatever nuts that you can find at your store. If they're raw and sold in a package without any salt or seasoning, that's your best option. Your second best option will be if they're roasted, but preferably unsalted. And I say unsalted only so that they provide more options to you in terms of how you want to use them. If the nuts and seeds have been roasted, you can just use them as is. If you're lucky enough to find them raw, then you just want to soak them and dry them, and you can just dry them in your oven. You don't need a fancy dehydrator or anything like that. And again, you know, as I said, check the description. I've got videos on how to do all of this. And the reason that you want to soak them is that raw nuts can be difficult to digest. They do contain anti-nutrients that there are mixed emotions or mixed feelings on how people feel about raw nuts. Some people are very comfortable with eating them, and younger people often have an easier time digesting them, but they can affect your digestive system and on how you absorb nutrients from them and from other foods going through your system. They can sometimes strip nutrients from your body, and that's really the last thing you want to do when you're trying to maximize nutrition. But sometimes younger people can handle this a little better than older people. So if your nuts are raw, soaking them can make them more digestible and allow you to absorb the nutrients better. But if you don't want to be involved with that, then your second best bet is just finding nuts that have been roasted, seeds that have been roasted, and you can usually enjoy those. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than just eating them raw. So if you can find the nuts roasted and the seeds roasted, no salt, so that if you want to put them on cereal, you know, they're a little more palatable than if they've been salted. But either way, adding nuts and seeds as number 6 to your grocery list will really increase the nutrition of the various foods that if you just enjoy them as is, or the various foods that you use to top foods with. Number 7 on your grocery list should be butter and or some type of oil. The butter can be unsalted or salted, whatever you like. And again, the better the quality, the butter you can buy, all the better. But don't stress about it. Having butter in your kitchen and using that to top cooked vegetables or to top your roast chicken to get the skin to crisp up nicely, or to use it in baking, it's very helpful and it's very nutritious and it's very flavorful, and it can really help in terms of making traditional foods very palatable and attractive to you, especially as you are. I know I say this a lot, but that is the most important thing, making the food attractive and palatable as you and your family and friends are making that transition from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen. And talking about butter being salted or unsalted, if you tend to buy unsalted products, this is a good time too, as you go down your aisle where generally the spices are sold, to start to look at the different sea salts that are sold at your grocery store. The salts that don't contain any type of anti-caking agents, that are just salt. Sometimes they're sea salts, sometimes they're the Himalayan salts, sometimes they're just called real salt. And incorporating some of that into your traditional foods kitchen is going to be very helpful. It's going to get you away from the more processed salts, and it's also going to be very useful to you as you venture ultimately into making ferments. Now, when it comes to oils, I tend to always keep a lot of olive oil on hand, and I think that has to do with my Italian heritage. But having various real oils on hand to make homemade salad dressings is going to be very important as you start to transition away from the store-bought bottled salad dressings. And you really have such a large selection today of oils that most grocery stores usually carry a fairly large selection of oils. Of course, you've got olive oil, there's avocado oil, there's walnut oil, there's sesame oil. Toasted sesame oil can be very nice, especially when making Asian dishes. You've got today, which is almost considered the star of the show, coconut oil. So there are a lot of oils to choose from. And you'll want to even maybe have a little bit of a variety of oils, because some are can be used in cooking, while others are better used just for making salad dressings and shouldn't be heated. So explore the selection of oils that are available to you at your grocery store. And just buy small bottles, because they can go rancid pretty quickly. But buy small bottles also so that you can try different oils and start to see what you like. Now, eventually, as you get comfortable with having butter and various oils in your traditional foods kitchen, you can over time venture into incorporating lard and beef tallow and schmaltz, which is chicken fat, and so on and so forth. But for now, especially if you're a beginner, start with butter and sometimes have a little variety of oils, and you're going to be all set. So be sure to put that on your grocery list. Number 8 are some type of alternative sweeteners. You definitely can have white sugar in your pantry, because it does come in handy for certain food preparations. However, if you're using sweeteners on a relatively regular basis, you want to wean the amount of white sugar that you eat. You want to wean yourself off the amount of white sugar you eat, and you want to turn to other alternative sweeteners. Now, I know for some of you, those are the real alternative sweeteners, the 0-calorie sweeteners, the stevia, whether liquid or powder. But what I'm talking about is incorporating some sweeteners into your kitchen, like honey, like maple syrup, or if you're ready to even venture into something a little more alternative, sucanat, which is a combination of words put together to make one word that stands for sugar cane natural. And basically it's just the sugar cane juice that has been dried. And so there's very low processing that goes into it compared to white sugar. And sucanat can be very useful in baking. And what's nice about it is, because it's not been processed other than being dried, it contains a lot of vitamins and minerals that would otherwise be extracted to create the white sugar. So that's something to look for. And I see that I live in a little town and they carry sucanat in my grocery store. I think the package may just say dried cane juice, but sometimes they do have the actual brand that says sucanat. So keep an eye out for that. But definitely in the beginning, as you're making the transition and weaning yourself, your family, friends off of white sugar, definitely start to incorporate some honey or maple syrup, or even if you find it, maple sugar can be very nice, into your new traditional foods kitchen. Number 9 is rice. And in that category, I'm also going to include whole grains if you're ready for that. Now, the reason I say rice, and it can be white rice, the reason I say this is because if you're buying rice blends that come in the box with a seasoned package and you want to, as I mentioned with the white sugar, weaning yourself off of it, and you want to wean yourself off buying these boxed, pre-prepared, as my mother always called them, pre-prepared or packaged foods, start to just buy white rice. This kind of harkens back to where I talked about just buying a whole chicken, whatever chicken, you can find. Just buy a bag of white rice. You will be amazed what you can do with just a simple bag of white rice. You can saute the rice, the raw rice, in a frying pan with butter, and then add your bone broth in place of water and make something that's very nutritious and something that your family's going to enjoy, that you're going to enjoy, that may be fairly close to what you would be buying in that little prepared box that has a seasoning packet. Because when you saute it, the raw rice with some butter, throw in a little salt, a little pepper, maybe some herbs, dried herbs, whatever you have, and then you add in your bone broth and let it cook up. It's delicious. And that, again, you're taking something that's very simple, not particularly nutritious, but you're upping the nutrition because you're adding the butter, you're adding the bone broth in place of water, and so you're making it more nutritious. And then once you work that into your diet over time, then if you're ready to branch out and start preparing brown rice, the transition is a little easier. It can be difficult to go from that lovely little easy box to prepare rice to all of a sudden just serving plain brown rice. You don't want to do that because you and your family, and especially children, they'll really resist. But if you make the transition slowly and you use some good butter, some good sea salt, and some bone broth, you're going to make something that's flavorful and nutritious. And then once you graduate to using brown rice, then you can try some of the grains. You can try bulgur wheat. You can try quinoa. I mean, there's so many different things, barley. There's so many different things that you will be able to start incorporating. But don't stress yourself. Just start with a bag of white rice and you'll be amazed at how delicious you can make it taste. Now, with that rice and talking about whole grains, in that general category, I also want to include beans. Now, don't get nervous about having to buy a bag of dried beans and cooking them. Can you do that? Definitely, and I highly recommend it. And again, I show you how to do that in a number of videos. I even show you how to sprout them if you really want to take things one step further and improve the nutrition. But there's nothing wrong with buying some canned beans to keep in your pantry for a quick soup or a quick meal. Just last night at dinner, I had some chickpeas that I tossed with olive oil and vinegar and oregano. This is the way my mother always prepared them, and I love it. A little sea salt. It was out of this world. So having some canned beans for those sort of last-minute meals when maybe you had purchased dried beans but forgot to soak them overnight and weren't prepared, having some canned beans in your pantry is going to be a lifesaver. There's a lot of things that you can do with beans. So add that to your shopping list. When you're looking at the rice, when you're looking maybe at some of the whole grains, also add in a couple of cans of different types of beans that you may like. Now, If you want to buy dried beans, that's great. But again, don't stress yourself where you buy a bag of dried beans and then it just sits in your pantry, and every time you open your pantry, your working pantry, your everyday pantry, and you see that bag of beans and you say, oh gee, I should soak those, but I've been there. So, but if you do want to take that step, that's great. But I recommend just starting with some canned beans, seeing the different recipes in which you can incorporate beans. Do you like them? Can you digest them? Are your family and friends enjoying them? And then say, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to buy the dried beans and I'm going to start preparing them from scratch. And they're very affordable, and once you have them made, you can pop them in your fridge and they're ready for meals, or you can bag them up individually in containers and put them in your freezer. They defrost beautifully. And so there's a lot that you can do when you get to that point where you're comfortable, but don't push the envelope, so to speak. If you want to start with canned beans, add that to your list, and I think that's fantastic. And just buy plain beans. Try to avoid buying beans that have a lot of other ingredients in them, a lot of herbs and spices that may actually be very artificial as opposed to herbs and spices you may add. They may be artificial flavors, and often those types of things don't agree with people, and that's many times what's spurred people to start making the transition from a traditional foods kitchen from a processed foods kitchen to a traditional foods kitchen, because they're finding that often one of the ingredients in some of the things they're eating may just be labeled natural flavors, but you come to find out that may be MSG, it may be other things that technically, yes, are natural, but may not make you feel well, or may give you a headache, or some people get hives. You hear about all these different reactions that people have to various things that are in processed foods, that are in canned or boxed foods. And this is really what precipitates them wanting to find out how to cook better and how to work more with real foods. So when you do add the canned beans to your list, just make sure it's just the beans, maybe some salt added, and at maximum that should be all that's in the can. And that's a wonderful staple to have in your pantry that can really help you out when it comes to making a simple and easy traditional foods meal. Now, number 10, last but not least, are fresh fruits. And in this, I'll also include vegetables. Now, we did earlier for number 2 talk about your carrots, your celery, your onions, and your garlic, which I really granted carrots and celery are vegetables, but I put those in the aromatics category. They work great, they're very affordable, and if that's the only vegetables you have, don't feel bad, it's not the end of the world. I recommend those all the time, along with some potatoes, and you've got a lovely meal that you can put together with a whole cooked chicken. But fresh fruits and fresh vegetables should always be on your grocery list. And when I say fresh fruits and fresh vegetables, buy them in season. This is when they are most reasonable, and when our bodies, our internal clocks, are best at digesting them. I've read many books that talk about how our gut bacteria changes with the seasons, and that's why it's very important to eat seasonally, because our bodies are equipped at better digesting certain foods at certain times of the year. So during the summer, try to find a lot of fresh berries in season. Excuse me. And then when you go into the fall, you'll have your late summer, early fall, you'll have your apples and your pears. And the nice thing about eating seasonally and shopping when things are in season, that's when they're usually lower in price. So it can be easier on your grocery budget. And the same is true of fresh vegetables. Buy them when they're in season and eat them fresh when they're in season. They're going to be more affordable, and I don't know, this would be interesting, and I would be interesting to hear this from all of you in the comments, but I find that I do actually crave foods that are in season. In the summer, I really enjoy eating berries. And when they're fresh, I don't so much enjoy eating frozen blueberries, for example, in the middle of January. And so that is something that I have found, because I've tried to really pay attention to it. I love fresh cucumbers in the middle of the summer. They're cold and juicy. And so really, you don't even necessarily, you can just write fresh fruits and veggies on your shopping list. You don't need to try to say, okay, I'm going to buy X and I'm going to use X in this recipe. Go to your market, go to your farmer's market, go to your grocery store, or maybe you're even growing some in your garden. But if you're shopping, look for those things that are the most reasonably priced. And that's a good way to tell you that those are what's in season. And buy those, and then once you have them home, then you can figure out how you're going to incorporate them into meals. Berries are so easy. You know, fruit in general is easy to incorporate into your meals. So, but just keep your eye out for what's the most reasonably priced. It's going to fit your budget, and you'll be eating things that are in season and that are good for you. Now, I know some of you may be asking, what about canned fruit and vegetables? Just like I talked about canned beans earlier, I am not against buying canned fruit and canned vegetables if that's what's in your budget. Also, I think canned fruits and canned vegetables can be very good for putting in your extended pantry. And that's where you put your food storage. And as I shared with you in an earlier video about those sort of 10 forever foods, canned foods, according to the USDA, and I'll link to that video in the description below, where I have a blog post about it too over on my website, and you can read more about it and read the links. But canned foods by the USDA have been, this is commercially canned foods, not home canned foods, but commercially canned foods, according to the USDA, are said to have basically an indefinite shelf life, that what's stamped on them is a best used by. And now, does the nutrition degrade 30 years from now if you open the can versus if you open the can today? Definitely. But I think stocking up on canned foods with canned beans, canned fruits, canned veggies is very important, and it's very important to have those in your extended pantry. And the reason is, whether you're facing illness or job loss or just a tighter financial budget, or like what we're going through now, when you often, we have a national worldwide emergency and foods are not always readily available, or you may not even be able to leave your home to go grocery shopping. Having some canned food as backups can be very helpful. And also, as I mentioned earlier, if that's what's in your food budget, starting with a can of green beans or a can of pears or whatever the case may be, and preferably one, when it comes to the fruit, that are just packed in their own juices as opposed to a heavy sugary syrup, is better than, it's a whole food, and it's better than relying on some processed food or some packaged food or some pre-prepared food. It's very simple. The more simple the ingredients, the better. Now, if you'd like to learn how to make some of the things that I've been talking about throughout this video and how to incorporate them into your meals in your traditional foods kitchen, be sure to click on this video over here. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.